My name's Chris Reynolds. I'm an Associate Professor of Contemporary French and European Studies, and I've been an academic for 13 years. I'm very interested in applying agonistic memory to a project that I'm leading in collaboration with the Ulster Museum in Northern Ireland, because I believe that this theoretical underpinning offers up the potential to provide solutions for the broader question of dealing with the legacy of the past in Northern Ireland. Yes, so I have a project at the Ulster Museum in Belfast which started out as a result of a book that I published into the events of 1968 in Northern Ireland. So we contacted a number of the protagonists who had interviewed previously and got them into a studio. So we initially started with 10 interviewees, and we effectively embedded the interview material into the museum exhibition. So at the moment in the permanent exhibition, looking at 1968, there are objects, of course, because it's a museum, but also those objects relate to an interactive table where you tap on the object in question and up pops a vox pop of me explaining the context, and then we cut the range of interviewees looking or explaining that object and that period in question. During the success of that, people started to get interested in it, and interestingly and very importantly, people who were working on the national curriculum started to take note of the project, because this period has recently become part of the history curriculum in Northern Ireland. It's a very problematic area for teachers to deal with because it's such a contested period. So we were really interested to strike up a partnership with the people who were involved in writing the curriculum, and they asked us would we host a study day at the museum. So we said yes, and we invited a number of schools down, and we set up a programme which basically entailed them having a number of talks from experts, local experts, academics, and also a tour of the galleries before having a session which involved a number of people who had been interviewed for the project. So people who had been there in 1968 who would share their reflections with the school kids, and that went really well, and the school kids really enjoyed hearing the reflections of the protagonists from the time. So we were encouraged, particularly then in the third stage of the project, to look at bringing on board voices that until this stage wouldn't have been part of the way the story of 1968 in Northern Ireland has been told. And we knew that they were going to be contested narratives. But what we felt, and what I strongly believe, is that in order for us to make sense of this period, Northern Ireland's 1968, it's very important that we don't avoid the contested narratives that exist, and that we bring on board and provide the space for different perspectives to come together, not with the objective of necessarily reaching some sort of consensus. Because I think, and this is broadly applicable in Northern Ireland anyway, I don't think there is a consensus, and I don't think we should be chasing one. Because if we do, then we're going to have to avoid some of these more difficult aspects. So agonism and the approach of bringing together those different perspectives is, for me, an important way in which we can increase our mutual understanding of what happened and why and what decisions were made. And I also think that it can increase the empathy, perhaps, across different sides in Northern Ireland. And whilst we won't come away in agreement from maybe some of the events or the exhibition, I do believe it will come away with an increased sense of understanding of why people behaved the way they did, why they made decisions that they did back in 1968. And if we can do that, I think we can move things forward, because in Northern Ireland the past has all too often been used to perpetuate the divisions that lie at the heart of the problems in Northern Ireland. And this agonistic approach, I believe, is a constructive way of looking at the past, which can contribute something, where the past can become a way in which we can start to heal the divisions in Northern Ireland rather than perpetuate them. And I believe that oral history, and so there's a connection there between oral history and the possibility to provide people with the possibility to express how passionate they are about these things. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, because the people who are actually giving their testimony feel as though they're at last being provided with the opportunity to voice what they really think about that period. But I think really importantly, and this has come through in feedback, when we speak to people who've seen the material, who've attended the study days, who go to the exhibition, they always point to those really passionate testimonies. They seem to touch a nerve in a way that maybe traditional forms don't. From the outset, we've been determined to stitch education into the way in which this project develops. Again, specifically for Northern Ireland, I think it's really important because we've got a generation of young people who've grown up in an era of peace, you know, albeit fragile peace, and they didn't know the Troubles, so they don't really get it, and that's a good thing, but they need to be aware of how we got to where we got, and we need to provide them with evidence that the past doesn't need to perpetuate those problems that existed beforehand. So that's the constituency we need to hit. Rather than try and convince people who won't be convinced, I think that if we can get to young people through education and provide the possibility for them to understand the different points of view that existed, I think that this can be much more of a constructive process rather than a destructive one. You are going to come up against some resistance in terms of bringing on board voices that some people believe shouldn't be part of the process. So within the context of Northern Ireland's 1968, I've interviewed people who would question the validity of the Northern Ireland civil rights movement around questions of discrimination, denying that the levels of discrimination were as significant as some people have suggested. And bringing those people on board is very controversial, and I've been criticised for giving those people a platform and a voice, but I firmly believe that we need to give them a platform and a voice, because just because we don't agree with what certain people say doesn't mean that that opinion doesn't exist. And if we can understand that that's the way they thought then we can understand why they made the decisions that they did, and we can make sense of what happened in the way that it did. So I think that if we avoid bringing in those contested narratives, what we're actually doing is just perpetuating these divisions and facilitate the continuation of divisions around the way in which we look at the past. So I think you need to be courageous and be able to stand up to people who will say, well, why are you giving that person a voice? And be able to explain. Because I think it's really important that to take on board that whilst museums are very important spaces and potent spaces, I believe, for projects that are based around an agonistic approach, not everybody goes to museums. And even those people that go to museums approach it in different ways. So the whole idea of agonistic contamination, as it's described, suggests that you need to come up with different ways in which to spread the word about your project. So we've tried to do that in terms of producing online content, digital versions of our exhibition, educational resources, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I think that's important is because we need to try and tap into a different constituency than just a museum visitor. And that's the case both from a class perspective, but also from a generational perspective. So, you know, if we can come up with cultural products that embed the same principles and approach of the project in general, that enables us to get to maybe difficult to reach people, then that's only going to improve the impact of the project. If we can create products that would engage young people. So that could be, so we've used augmented reality in our exhibition, which I believe would be of great interest to young people when they come to the museum. This is an opportunity for them to use their phones while they're in the museum, which is not the sort of thing that they would be used to. But also I like the idea of developing video games as an approach, because these things should be seen as ways of unlocking engagement. As an entry point for people to delve into the principles of the project. We don't have to compromise the principles of the project. These are ways in which we can make them more accessible, and if that means producing all different types of cultural products, then that can only be a good thing and an important thing.